Hello, everybody, and welcome in to Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day, and on this episode, I'm very excited to welcome in Taylor Kenney, economic journalist and the host of Tailor-Made Economics for ITM Trading. We're going to talk about the major catalysts she currently sees driving both the gold and silver markets and pose the all-important question: when will we see triple-digit silver prices? We're going to explore why she thinks the Fed will be forced to fire up the money printers in short order or risk a complete catastrophe. We're of course going to discuss the ongoing tariff fiasco and trade war between the US and China and how it could affect precious metals markets and so much more. I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with Taylor Kenney. Taylor Kenney, it is great to have you on Commodity Culture. I've been following your work for a while now. Of course, I had you on the VRIC media channel, which was a big hit. I think you're responsible for maybe our most viewed video actually ever, your presentation at the VRIC on the VRIC media channel. Great to have you here. I'm going to kick things off the same way I do with all new guests. That is with a broad question. You can take it wherever you'd like. What are the main themes and trends you're currently watching when it comes to the global economy and financial markets that you think more investors should be paying attention to?
Thank you, Jesse. Happy to be here. Yeah, big picture, there's a lot. But I guess when I think big themes, there's two that I really focus on. The first is the acceleration away from the dollar, which I know a lot of people have talked about. And I always like to say, too, I'm not saying the dollar is going to collapse tomorrow, but this is absolutely something that everyone needs to be paying attention to. We are seeing a move into gold and out of the dollar, and it's impacting everything. And when I say everything, that leads me kind of into the second thing I'm watching too, which is the everything bubble. I've talked a lot about bubbles. When they pop violently. Not slowly. It's not all the air coming out, right? It happens suddenly. And I think there are a lot of people right now going, well, is that what we're really going to see? Because we're kind of in this transition period, this breaking period right now, and no one really knows exactly what's going on or what's going to happen next. But there are a lot of warning signals that I'm seeing. And to be honest, in my opinion, we still have assets that are completely overvalued. And I think we have a long way to go. And I think these two are intertwined and they're going to impact a lot. And we see this with the Fed already talking about, potential monetary easing behind the scenes. We see liquidity tightening up. We see bond yields rising. We see all these different things that, in my opinion, are warning signs of what's to come. And I think too many investors are focused on the day-to-day, the small movements, when they need to be kind of taking a step back, zooming out and looking at the big picture.
Well, let's shift to discussing specifically the precious metals markets. Then I want to circle back and actually get your take on the Trump tariffs, the US-China trade war, and your thoughts on the broad market, expanded thoughts as well. But first, let's focus in on gold. How are you currently viewing the main catalyst driving the gold price? And do you think we are still in the early stages of a gold bull market here?
Absolutely. In the early stages. I'm not worried so much about day to day because I don't view gold as a trade, right? I view gold, that is my insurance policy. That is my wealth protection. And that's what's going to set me up for the next monetary system, whatever that looks like. As far as the main driving forces, I think the beauty of gold is that, while it might react a little bit again to a Fed announcement or a comment from the White House, there are these huge driving forces that are happening. And that's why, again, in my opinion, it's not just a regular trade. When I look at gold, it is this monetary shift that's happening. Of course, central bank buying being one of the largest ones, right? And gold up year to date over 20%. Again, I'm not so worried about the day to day. I think that we are very early days and we are only going to see it continue to accelerate because, in my opinion, is the dollar ever going to be front and center again? Is it going to be king? Is it going to be this global reserve currency we can count on? No, right? No, I don't believe so at all. I think we are in this shift that's accelerating, and it's a move away from the dollar to gold. And as that continues, we're going to see gold continue to go up.
And now a quick break to hear from our sponsor, ARC Silver Gold Osmium owner Ian Everard is considered one of the most honest and level-headed gold and silver dealers in the United States, praised even by his competitors. So give him a call today to take advantage of the specials right now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, mint fresh, only $2.47 over spot. Mint fresh silver maple leafs 2025 coins, 1 ounce, $2.87 over spot. While supplies last. Reach out today at 307 264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. Well, let's hone in on central bank gold buying. Have you been watching which central banks are stacking gold at present? And what does that data tell you about the future of the global monetary system? Because there's a lot of speculation as to why so many central banks are accumulating. Most would probably point to the freezing of Russia's FX reserves by the US and its European allies after the invasion, how that woke up all the sovereign nations around the world to realize, hey, we need a form of wealth outside of counterparty risk. Others, though, were saying that behind the scenes, perhaps the central bankers know something that the general public doesn't, that there could be some potential monetary reset on the horizon with gold involved. What are your thoughts?
I think both are true. So when we talk about waking up to, Russia's assets, the largest buyer last year and Q1 of this year was Poland, right? Poland's right next to Ukraine and Russia. They obviously saw firsthand what could happen, that your U.S. assets could just be flipped off with the button of a remote, right? Boom, you're done. They're frozen. We're actually going to take that interest and then fund the person that you're in a war against. Whether you agree with that or not from a policy standpoint, obviously, no one who has any common sense is going to want to hold those assets. But when we look at the broader move towards gold, I do think this idea of they know something we don't, absolutely, of course. We look at Basel III, we look at this push internationally to make gold a tier one asset. Why is that happening? What is going on? I think that we are seeing a general push towards commodities, but gold being at the center. And I believe it goes back to trust. Trust in fiat currency is broken. Trust in the dollar is broken. And that's why the dollar is declining, right? First and foremost. What we need for a new system is trust, and not trust in promises, empty promises, paper promises, backed by faith and credit of a government. We need real, tangible, physical trust. And I think that's where gold steps in. And I think that these central bankers, they know that, they understand that, and they are preparing. They're not just using it as a safe haven asset. They're preparing for what's coming next.
Well, gold holding up incredibly well in the aftermath of Trump's tariff announcements and the whole Liberation Day fiasco. But what did not hold up so well was, pretty much everything, but especially when it comes to the precious metals, people were focusing on silver because it was close to reaching $35 an ounce. It had touched that level, looking like it could perhaps break above. A lot of analysts pointing to the fact that if silver breaks and stays above $35, we're kind of off to the races. However, it got knocked sub $30 once again, now staging a bit of a recovery around $32 and change here. Why do you think silver didn't hold up as well as gold? Is that telling us that silver's lost a lot of its monetary, its safe haven value, and is seen more as an industrial commodity by market participants?
I don't think so. No, I don't believe so. I mean, obviously it has dual function, monetary and industrial. I think it makes sense logically on its face, on the surface, when you look at potential for, a slowdown in trade, potentially a slowdown in production with electronics or solar or anything that uses silver. You could see that there could be a pullback, and maybe that was more on its industrial function. But do I think it's lost its monetary function? Absolutely not. No, I mean, silver's been around since the dawn of time, and there's a reason for that. And I think that we are going to see silver go back up. I think that right now it was maybe just leaning on its industrial. I'm sure there are people out there watching who are going to come for me in the comments and say, no, it was suppression, it was manipulation. Do I believe that silver should be higher? Yes, absolutely. But on the surface, logically, do I think that this was just a situation where all these kind of perfect storm elements came together and the industrial component took over? Yes, that does not mean it's lost its monetary role at all, in my opinion.
So what do you think are the catalysts that could push silver back to real all-time highs? At this point, we're looking at triple-digit silver adjusted for inflation. I know a lot of people say throw out the 1980 high because that was created by the Hunt brothers putting a squeeze on the market. It didn't naturally go to that price. Okay, but if we go to 2011, it nearly got to $50 once again. So let's use that level, the 2011 high adjusted for inflation now should be triple-digit silver. What are the catalysts that you think could get us there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that if we're not in one already, we're heading for a currency crisis. Again, not to use too much hyperbole, but as the dollar continues to decline, we are going to see inflation continue to rise, leading to hyperinflation. In my opinion, a currency reset, whether that's a revaluation, a devaluation of the dollar officially, whether that happens naturally. I mean, there's a lot of different ways this could kind of play out, but we can all feel that it's happening. And I think that as the dollar continues to lose its position of power, that is when we are going to see silver roar back. And any time in history that you've looked, I mean, going back way before 2011, if we're looking at just throughout history, different types of currency resets, we always see the gold and silver ratio, come close together. And I think what would happen today is we're going to see gold, like I said, go sky high, and we're going to see silver not match it, but we are absolutely going to see silver follow in its footsteps. So I do believe that we could see that happen as the dollar continues to lose its position of power.
I want to switch to the realm of politics and geopolitics for a moment, because I think it's an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to understanding the global economy and even precious metals markets in many ways. We saw Mark Carney win in Canada and then Anthony Albanese win in Australia. These are two hardcore globalists who are opposed to free speech and obsessed with climate change and achieving net zero goals no matter the cost. What does this mean for those countries in your view? And is it more important than ever for citizens in those countries, in particular, places like the UK as well, where we're starting to see, citizens get thrown in jail for social media posts, on and on. The whole EU is kind of undergoing this censorship regime. How important does that make it then for citizens to be holding physical gold and silver in their own possession?
Paramount. It's essential, in my opinion, that everyone should hold gold and silver. And I think that they're all interconnected, right? So there were kind of two components there that you mentioned. You talked about focused on climate change. And I mean, we know that's big initiatives for both of these countries. I think Australia is trying to do 87% renewable clean by 2030. That's in 5 years. These are both resource rich countries. And what's going to happen is we are going to see an economic breakdown. And at the same time that we're seeing this kind of kibosh on social media free speech, that's when you get a lot of, societal unrest, social unrest. I'm not saying that that's going to happen again overnight. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but it is kind of a perfect storm of what that could lead to. And whenever we see this, you're going to see the currency, again, the fiat currencies in jeopardy. And it's scary. You look at Australia too. They've been pushing for cashless for years now. Why is that? Maybe it's because they think that it makes it more equitable and easier, or is it just about power and control and limiting your freedoms and privacy, right? And that's not a system you want to be stuck inside by any means. In Canada, I mean, we've seen examples in the past, of course, where you speak out, you have your accounts frozen, you don't have access. If you don't have access to your money, is it really your money? That's what I always ask. And the answer is no. So you want to make sure that you take your power back in your own hands and get protected. That's what I tell people.
Yeah, that's what I tell people too. I actually just gave a virtual presentation at a conference in Lethbridge, Alberta, specifically about this topic, considering sound money alternatives to fiat currency. I think it's really paramount, as you mentioned, that people educate themselves and get some physical gold and silver in their possession. I want to switch to the trade war that continues to rage between the US and China. The latest development being that China, Japan, and South Korea, along with some other Southeast Asian countries, are now getting together and talking about ways to circumvent these tariff policies and to strengthen cooperation between them, which is a very positive development in my view for that region of the world. But it shows that perhaps Trump doesn't have as much negotiating power as he thought he did. What are your thoughts on how you see this whole situation evolving? I talk to people with opinions everywhere, from Trump is playing 4D chess, he knows exactly what he's doing, to he's a buffoon, he doesn't know what he's doing, and everywhere in the middle. I wonder what your take is here and what this trade war could mean for the US dollar and the American economy.
Yeah, I think it's less about does Trump have the sway or power that he thought he did, and more about does the dollar in the United States have the sway and power that it once did. I think that's what's really going on here, right? These countries have been for years now, have been preparing for this. I don't think they were ready for it to happen the way it's happened today, but this isn't a new conversation. This wasn't something that caught them unawares. So as far as how this is going for me, it's not just about tariffs. It's again about that weaponization of the dollar. Now, it could be a controlled demolition. I've heard people also say, maybe we're just trying to get in front. We're front running this reset that's coming. Instead of sticking our head in the sand or doing what we've always done, maybe we're just buying time, or maybe it's an unintentional controlled demolition, right? I actually don't know. I wish I did. If I did, I don't know where I would be right now, but I can only guess myself. But to be honest, one way or the other, regardless of whether it's intentional or not, we are seeing an acceleration of the decline of the dollar. And I almost feel like a broken record because I think I've already said that 5 times on here, but it is absolutely what's going on. And it's just pushing this along faster.
And what would you say to those who point to the amount of US dollars that are used in the global monetary system? They point to that as evidence that the dollar can really never truly lose its reserve status. The fact that so much sovereign debt of other nations is denominated in US dollars. The fact, of course, that so many nations have to use US dollars when settling trade with each other. We've seen some of the BRICS countries kind of start to circumvent that, perhaps early days. There's the euro dollar market, which is just nobody really knows how many US dollars are out there being used internationally. Some put that number at a pretty high amount. And so, I had Darius Dale on the show recently, and his point about all this was to extricate the US dollar as the world's reserve currency and switch to some other monetary system. The only way that can happen is you cannot do that without World War III breaking out. It's just not possible. What are your thoughts on those 2 points? The fact that perhaps conflict will be required to bring that transition about, and the fact that there's so many US dollars out there floating around and being used by different nations that it wouldn't be possible for the US dollar to lose reserve currency status.
I think first and foremost, anything's possible. And I think there's a reason that there is only one global reserve currency, and it hasn't been around since the dawn of time. It's because the primary currency comes and goes. It cycles, right? We've seen this all throughout history. I don't know why this time would be any different if you take away everything else that's going on. As far as the argument goes that, oh, well, all these other countries are holding dollars, they would only be hurting themselves. It's true. That's why China hasn't unloaded all of their holdings overnight, right? There's a reason that the countries are holding on, but they are slowly reducing their holdings. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think, again, it's a misconception around this topic that, oh, it's going to poof happen overnight. Now, do I think that conflict is going to be a part of this? I don't really see how it couldn't be, unless the United States, again, was the one actually front running this new system. There is a world in which maybe it's not other nations band together and it's a multipolar currency world or cross-border trade that's happening in a peaceful way. Maybe the United States has some tricks up their sleeve and they push forward some kind of new system and everyone kind of has to fall in line. But yeah, I don't want to sound negative or pessimistic about it. But I absolutely do agree that there probably is going to be some serious turmoil. I don't know how there couldn't be.
And do you think we could see 2 parallel monetary systems, perhaps one by the BRICS members and their allies, where they eventually introduce some sort of gold and commodities-backed trading currency as they've been talking about, and then the traditional kind of US hegemony, the fiat currency regime being used by the US and its allies, and perhaps those 2 systems compete with each other? Am I just crazy here? Or could that be a possibility?
You're not crazy at all. I think the idea of a neutral settlement currency or some kind of commodity gold-backed currency existing harmoniously with the dollar is a possibility. But I think, again, most nations are smart enough to realize which one do you want to be a part of. And I think, again, what that would do is it would just set off this domino effect where the dollar would continue to lose its position of power. And I think that's why we saw President Trump so early on dig his heels in and say, no BRICS nations, no one can use anything but the dollar, blah, 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 right? There's a reason he did that. It's because once you start to release the control, the United States is built on this control of having the global reserve currency and the dollar. Without it, I mean, the quality of life that anyone is used to here, just day-to-day living, it would change drastically overnight. Not to, again, sound too alarmist, but that's the reality, is that we have built our position of power, our strength, and it would really diminish very quickly, even if a small amount of that was lost, unfortunately.
You mentioned the broad market at the top of the show, just how it appears to be overvalued. You said these types of bubbles tend to pop violently. It's interesting how long this bull market has been going on. A lot of that driven by passive investing into these index funds and ETFs. Why do you think people keep buying the dip at this point in time? Is this just people have been conditioned to believe that tomorrow is going to be like today, which was like yesterday? And since the great financial crisis, if all you did was buy an S&P index fund or a NASDAQ or name your big indices, and you just piled into that and you just sat there and dollar cost average, you massively multiplied your wealth. Are people watching that and extrapolating that into the future? Is that why you think this buy the dip mentality is so prevalent?
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, particularly in the United States, people have short-term memory loss. I like to say is like a collective, right? I think that there's this idea that things have been going well for so long, they're going to continue to go well. There's a lot of that fear of missing out going on. And you see all these people who have had tremendous success, not to knock anyone, right? There are a lot of people out there who are vocal, telling their neighbors, their coworkers, whoever will listen, their mailman, hey, I made X, Y, and Z. Hey, you got to be in this. Hey, you got to do that. Hey, you're not paying attention if you don't do this and this and this. And no one wants to be the one left behind. If you see that person driving a new car or you feel like they've made profit, of course you want to jump in. You don't want to say, oh, it's too late, I missed it. Because then you have to look at yourself and say, oh, did I miss a great opportunity? I think people just want to be a part of the action. And they're willing to temporarily put aside any fears or that gut feeling that's telling you this probably isn't the right decision. I think a lot of people are just forgetting how painful this really could end up.
Yeah, and looking at history, it doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And this is kind of emblematic, I think, of a lot of previous overvalued markets. This time, the big shiny object is AI. So we'll see how that all plays out. I want to touch on a tweet you made recently where you said the Fed's reverse repo facility is running dry fast. When it hits zero, the money printer goes on overdrive. They won't call it a bailout, but that's exactly what it is. Could you break that down further for us? What are you seeing there?
Sure. So I think, again, this actually does kind of tie to markets as well. It really goes into this big picture concept of there's a liquidity crisis. A couple of weeks ago, we got really close, and it's not to say it's not going to happen again. We're not out of the woods yet. Essentially, what's going on right now is as we see liquidity tightening for these too big to fail institutions, and it's not just banks, hedge funds, right? All of the shadow banking institutions, kind of everyone in the financial space, as liquidity is running dry, the last thing that those in power want is for the system to seize up again, right? And then they have to come out the same way they did in 2008 and do an official bailout. What I like to say is that the Fed has gotten smarter, wiser, and sneakier, and that they are now equipped to do bailouts by a different name. But if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck, right? So what I mean by that is people go, well, point to some facts about a liquidity crisis. One of them is the reverse repo facility. And for those who aren't familiar with this, it sounds complicated. It's really kind of like the plumbing of the financial system. It's essentially a tool where these banks, like Wall Street's pawn shop, these banks can park their treasuries in exchange for cash, liquidity, with the promise to buy them back. Now, at its peak, this was around the end of 2001, beginning of 2022, there's $2.5 trillion in this facility, meaning that they weren't desperate for liquidity. They had enough. There was a big inflow following stimulus, right? Everyone was good. 2 weeks ago, we were down to 90 billion. Today, it's about 200 billion. But again, not out of the woods by any means. We are close to zero. When that number hits zero, that means that these institutions lose a crucial tool that they are relying on to have liquidity for when their bets are bad, right? Which again, the last couple of weeks we saw, oh my gosh, everyone's racing for liquidity and it's tightening up. The whole system's tightening up. When that number hits zero, what do you think the Fed does? Do they say, oh, sorry, nothing else that we can do? No, they create more dollars out of thin air and they allow them, basically they say, okay, great, we'll take your treasuries. Here it is. They give them cash that doesn't exist. And it has the exact same effect. It's essentially bailing out these institutions for their bad bets to make sure that there's enough movement, enough to grease the wheels of the machine. But ultimately, it's inflationary. And it hurts every single individual out there who has dollars, any dollar denominated asset. It's completely unfair. And it actually really makes me mad because now it's just sneakier. It's the same playbook, just by a different name.
Do you give any credence to the narrative out there that this is all kind of a controlled demolition? A lot of these policies made by seemingly incompetent people, perhaps they are competent. In fact, they're trying to bring about a controlled collapse of the economy to better control populations. This also ties in to the pandemic. It ties into what a lot of people are saying about mass immigration to various societies. And do you think there's a master plan behind this? Are you a subscriber to the thought that there is a globalist cabal trying to manipulate societies to gain more power and control for themselves?
I mean, it's difficult to imagine that so many people could be so incompetent. So yes, to be honest, yes. Do I have, tangible proof? Can I sit here and lay out every single, no. And I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist either, but it does make a lot of sense, especially when you look at these global institutions that, again, it feels like they're in on something because they are preparing in tandem. And a lot of the decisions that are being made, they just do not make logical sense. It feels as though we are moving towards this controlled demolition again, because why else would we be weakening the dollar so much? Why else would we be pushing a sell off in the treasury market? Why else would we be doing all of this? Unless, like I said, we were kind of trying to front run some kind of collapse because we know that something else is coming. And the entire world is so intertwined now. Every single nation so reliant on one another. We've had so much globalization that it does, again, feel very difficult to imagine that the top institutions don't have some kind of sense from a bird's eye view of what's going on and what's coming next.
Well, speaking of weakening the dollar, you released a video recently on ITM Trading on Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent slamming the IMF and quietly admitting the dollar is in trouble. Explain that for us. And, we talked about this controlled demolition. I think there's been talk that the Trump administration wants to weaken the dollar for trade purposes to boost the U.S. economy. Do you see that as something that's part of their mandate as well?
Yeah, that was an interesting one because I felt like not as many people were coming out and talking about it. But in my opinion, Scott Bessent basically went to the IMF and said, it's time for the IMF to be the IMF again, right? Said it's time to fix the global economy, to get back to basics. He accused them of policy drift, amongst other things, which might be true, right? Focusing on climate change or other initiatives instead of really what they were created to do, which is to support the dollar and Western economic initiatives. But if you're saying that that is no longer the case and they're not supporting it and we need to go back to where we were, you're basically also admitting that the dollar is not the global superpower that it once was, which again isn't a surprise to most of us. But I thought it was an interesting move to have the Treasury Secretary come out and allude to that. And the difference is when the IMF was created and to support the dollar, it was, of course, backed by gold. We were on the gold standard. So to say that we need to go back to where we were and fix the system, it doesn't make sense unless something has changed with the dollar, unless the dollar is fixed, right? I mean, as far as what we had before and what we have today, they're apples and oranges. So something big is going to have to change. Again, we can't keep going the way we're going. Now, as far as President Trump weakening the dollar, it's no secret he's been a fan of a weaker dollar. And I agree. I think that trade is so big on his agenda that it would make sense to increase exports. And another reason, of course, too, is to potentially reduce the debt burden. We have 36 trillion and counting, almost 37 trillion, $1 trillion annually just on the interest of our debt. I always say to people when they go, oh, everyone's been screaming about the debt forever. Well, this is why they've been screaming about it, because now we're reaching that point where it's like if you have a credit card and you keep making your payment and you keep racking up more debt and eventually you're making the minimum payment, but it's not making any difference on the debt. That is where we are. The deficit continues to grow and a weaker dollar obviously helps with our debt crisis. So I don't know, again, I don't know if that answered your question or if there's another one in there, but sorry, don't get me going on the debt. I'll just start riffing.
No, you definitely addressed it. Scott Bessent, it should be noted, has called himself a gold bug in the past. And we saw President Trump recently put out a cryptic post where he mentioned he who holds the gold makes the rules. Do you think they're working towards, you said the U.S. could potentially front run the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency, perhaps heralding in some sound money alternative or some way to maybe reback the dollar with gold? People have been talking about the potential revaluation of the gold on the Fed's balance sheet. Do you think this administration could potentially be moving towards introducing gold once again somehow to the monetary system?
100%. I mean, if you think about it, President Trump has only been in office now, it feels like we've lived multiple lifetimes. Time is moving so fast in some ways, but it's been 3-4 months. It has not been that long since he was back in office. And in that time period, we have had calls to audit Fort Knox. We've talked about live streams at Fort Knox. Scott Bessent said he wants to monetize the asset side of the balance sheet. President Trump, like you said, talking about gold. I absolutely believe that a gold revaluation could be happening. Now, I say that a gold revaluation could happen in two ways. One is like a natural revaluation where it's free market, right? And we just see gold react to different things that are going on and buying and whatever else is happening. The second, of course, is an official revaluation, which is a decree where they come in and say, okay, this is what gold is going to be now per ounce. It would make absolute sense for me to revalue the gold because, again, it could solve a lot of problems all at once. And this is where I talk again about that possibility where if the United States backs against the wall and they realize that they don't have a lot of options, they're going to have to come up with something. And this could be that something.
What are your thoughts on central bank digital currencies at present? Because this is a story that's been swirling around for the past several years, that this is going to be the next step in totalitarian government control. They're going to be able to track what you're buying, control your carbon consumption, all these sorts of things. But we haven't really seen concrete steps like an actual announcement of anything being launched. And we previously just discussed about Trump and Bessent looking at gold when it comes to the monetary system. So it doesn't feel like the Trump administration is going to push forward a CBDC. But what are your thoughts on the potential rollout of central bank digital currencies, both at home in the US and globally?
It's a good question because to your point, there was kind of a lot of fear a couple of years ago in particular about CBDCs. Then it almost felt like everything got a little bit quiet. And even here in the United States, right, since President Trump took office again, he came out and said, no CBDCs, right, new laws in place, blah, blah, blah. My take on it is, to be honest, that there will still be CBDCs. I don't think the threat has gone away at all. I just think, once again, they realize that it's not popular. And I think in order to have a CBDC work, there has to be widespread adoption, right? And probably really quickly, because if you don't get that adoption quickly, you're going to have a situation where citizens are going to make sure everyone knows and move away. And you don't want to allow any escape routes. You want to close down all the escape routes. I think personally what's going to happen is there will be a CBDC. It'll just be by another name. Central bank digital currency, right, is what it stands for. So we all had this picture in our mind of exactly what it was going to look like and how it would operate. I think that they're going to come up with some other kind of name. Maybe it's not through the Fed. Maybe it's not, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. Maybe it's tied to some kind of stable coin that's tied to a dollar that's tied to this or that. Ultimately, if it is a digital dollar or digital fiat currency, whatever nation we're talking about, that can be programmed, that removes your privacy and your freedoms. In my opinion, that is the threat, right? It's not the acronym of the 4 letters. It's the threat of you not having control over your finances and therefore your freedoms. That's really the threat. And I don't think it's gone away. I mean, if you gave those empowered the option to enact some kind of tool like this, don't you think they would take it? Of course they will. I just think that they realize they have to find a way to do it or there's adoption, widespread adoption. So potentially maybe in a crisis situation, I think the threat is still out there. Absolutely.
Well, Taylor, this has been a fantastic conversation. Tell us about your work at ITM Trading. If there's anywhere else you want to direct people online as well, feel free.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Jesse. So, yes, if anyone is interested, I focus on breaking down complex financial topics so we can all learn and grow together. That is my passion, is helping try and make everything easy to understand. You can find me at ITM Trading on YouTube. Tailor Made Economics is my show there. And you can also find me on X, Taylor Kenney ITM.
Great. I will put links to both of those in the description below. Highly recommend people check out your work on ITM Trading. You do a great job over there and really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today. As a reminder, this episode is brought to you by ARC Silver Gold Osmium. Take advantage of their specials now. Silver Kangaroos 2023 1-ounce coins, $2.47 over spot. Silver Maple Leafs 2025 1-ounce silver coins, $2.87 over spot. Both of these deals are while supplies last, so reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.